geneticist Donald Yates, who not only through his own Cherokee ancestry discovered his own Jewish roots, but he's also leading the charge in the DNA discoveries of the ancient roots of the Cherokee and other Native American communities.
America's darkest secret has been hiding in plain sight inside the bloodline of the Cherokee Nation, and now the new DNA evidence has finally exposed it. For generations, the story of the Cherokee people has been told through legend, oral history, and fragments of colonial records. But now, cutting-edge DNA analysis has unlocked answers that were once thought impossible to prove. The findings are not only rewriting what we know about the Cherokee, but also exposing a buried truth about America's past that many would rather keep hidden. So follow along as we peel back the layers of history and uncover what Cherokee DNA truly reveals about America's hidden past. The DNA revolution that changed everything. The story begins with modern Cherokee descendants who wanted to prove their Native American heritage through DNA testing. What they discovered instead was something nobody expected: genetic markers that told a completely different story about Cherokee ancestry. Cherokee DNA has very little Asiatic, but is mostly from Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. According to research conducted by DNA consultants, this finding was so unexpected that it prompted years of additional research to understand what these results actually meant. Traditional genetic studies had always assumed that Native American populations descended primarily from Asian groups who crossed the Bering Land Bridge thousands of years ago. But when researchers started analyzing Cherokee DNA samples, they found something remarkable: genetic signatures that pointed to completely different ancestral origins. The breakthrough came when scientists began comparing Cherokee genetic markers with populations from around the world. Instead of finding the expected Asian ancestry, several of the Middle Eastern DNA test markers were traced back to pre-Roman period female ancestors. This wasn't just one or two unusual samples. The majority of subjects revealed anomalous haplotypes not previously classified as American Indian.
As a member of the Cherokee Nation and living in rural Oklahoma, the lack of connectivity really impacts.
When you're seeing consistent patterns across multiple unrelated Cherokee individuals, you know you're looking at something significant. But here's where things get really intriguing. These weren't random genetic anomalies. The DNA patterns showed clear connections to specific populations from the Mediterranean region, the Middle East, and parts of Europe. It was as if Cherokee ancestry had multiple origins that researchers had never considered before. The implications were staggering. If these DNA findings were accurate, it meant that Cherokee people had ancestral connections that stretched back to the ancient world in ways that completely challenged conventional understanding of how Native American populations developed. What made these discoveries even more compelling was that they weren't isolated to just a few families. 21 or 80% of Western Cherokee had a high match with the U.S. Cherokee admixed populations, suggesting these genetic patterns were widespread throughout Cherokee communities. The research revealed that Cherokee genetic heritage appeared to be far more complex than anyone had imagined. Instead of a single ancestral population, the DNA evidence suggested multiple waves of migration and settlement that created the unique genetic signature we see in Cherokee people today. The Middle Eastern Connection Mystery. One of the most shocking discoveries in Cherokee DNA research was the consistent presence of Middle Eastern genetic markers. This finding was so unexpected that it sent researchers scrambling to understand how and when such ancestry could have entered Cherokee populations. 87.53% Orcadian European and 12.47% Middle Eastern, Palestinian, Adigai, Bedouin, Druze, Iranian, Jewish represents typical results that Cherokee descendants were seeing in their DNA tests. These were not trace amounts. These were substantial percentages that indicated significant ancestral connections. The Middle Eastern markers weren't just randomly distributed. They showed specific patterns that suggested connections to ancient populations from the Levant region, including areas that are now Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. Some samples even showed genetic connections to ancient Jewish populations. But how could Cherokee people have Middle Eastern ancestry? This question led researchers down fascinating historical rabbit holes. Some theories suggested that these genetic markers could trace back thousands of years to ancient migrations that preceded the more well-known Asian migrations across the Bering Strait. Others wondered if these connections might relate to much more recent historical events. Could there have been contact between Old World populations and Native Americans long before Columbus? The DNA evidence seemed to suggest possibilities that mainstream history hadn't considered. The research became even more intriguing when scientists discovered that these Middle Eastern genetic markers appeared in Cherokee populations from different geographic regions. This wasn't just a localized phenomenon, it was showing up consistently across Cherokee communities. What really puzzled researchers was the antiquity of these genetic connections. Several of the Middle Eastern DNA test markers were traced back to pre-Roman period female ancestors, suggesting that whatever historical events created these genetic patterns happened in the distant past.
In Kenwood, we're an isolated Cherokee community.
The complexity of these genetic findings challenged simple explanations. This wasn't just about one historical migration or contact event. The DNA evidence suggested multiple layers of ancestry that accumulated over long periods of time. Some researchers began wondering if Cherokee people represented a unique population that formed through ancient migrations from multiple continents. The genetic evidence seemed to support the idea that Cherokee ancestry was far more cosmopolitan than anyone had previously imagined. The Middle Eastern connection also raised questions about cultural and linguistic connections. If Cherokee people had genetic ties to Middle Eastern populations, were there other similarities that historians and linguists had missed? The European ancestry puzzle. While the Middle Eastern DNA findings were shocking enough, researchers discovered that European ancestry was even more prominent in Cherokee genetic profiles. This discovery raised profound questions about Cherokee origins and American history. The European genetic markers found in Cherokee DNA weren't just scattered random connections. They showed specific patterns that suggested significant ancestral relationships with populations from particular regions of Europe, especially the Mediterranean area and parts of Eastern Europe. What made these findings particularly puzzling was their apparent antiquity. These weren't genetic markers that could be explained by intermarriage during colonial times. The patterns suggested much deeper historical connections that predated European colonization of the Americas. Results showed mostly Eastern European, and a small percentage, now identified as Western Asian, became a common pattern that Cherokee descendants were seeing in their DNA results. This was far from what anyone expected when testing for Native American ancestry. The European ancestry appeared in maternal lineages, suggesting that female ancestors with European genetic backgrounds had become integrated into Cherokee populations at some point in the distant past. This raised questions about when and how such integration could have occurred. Some researchers began investigating whether there might have been pre-Columbian contact between European populations and Native Americans. While this idea was controversial, the DNA evidence seemed to suggest historical connections that mainstream archaeology hadn't documented. The European genetic signatures weren't uniform across all Cherokee populations. Different Cherokee communities showed slightly different patterns of European ancestry, suggesting that whatever historical processes created these genetic connections were complex and varied. What particularly intrigued researchers was the specific types of European ancestry they were finding. These weren't broad European genetic patterns, they were specific markers that pointed to particular populations and regions, suggesting focused rather than random historical connections. The European ancestry findings also challenged traditional narratives about Native American genetic isolation before European contact. If Cherokee people had significant European ancestry that predated Columbus,
for Cherokee people, it's all about keeping our culture alive. And when we think of saving communities,
it suggested that the genetic history of Native Americans was far more complex than previously understood. These discoveries forced researchers to reconsider fundamental assumptions about American prehistory. The DNA evidence seemed to suggest that genetic exchange between continents might have been occurring long before documented historical contact. Challenging the Bering Strait theory. the Cherokee DNA discoveries didn't just reveal unexpected ancestral connections, they also raised serious questions about the traditional Bering Strait migration theory that has dominated thinking about Native American origins for decades. According to conventional theory, Native Americans descended primarily from Asian populations who crossed a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska during the last ice age, roughly 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. But Cherokee DNA patterns didn't fit this model at all. Cherokee DNA has very little Asiatic, but is mostly from Europe, the Mediterranean and Middle East. This finding was so inconsistent with the Bering Strait theory that it forced researchers to consider alternative explanations for Cherokee origins. If Cherokee people had minimal Asian ancestry, despite being classified as Native Americans, it suggested that either the Bering Strait migration wasn't the only way people reached the Americas, or Cherokee people had different origins than other Native American groups. Some researchers began investigating the possibility of multiple migration routes to the Americas. Perhaps people reached North America not just from Asia via the Bering Strait, but also through Atlantic routes from Europe and the Middle East. The DNA evidence seemed to support theories about ancient maritime capabilities that historians had previously dismissed. Could ancient peoples have crossed the Atlantic Ocean thousands of years ago?
Were shipped to the New World, 2 million people would not survive the horrific Atlantic crossing.
The genetic patterns in Cherokee DNA suggested this might have been possible. Other researchers wondered if Cherokee people might represent descendants of much earlier migrations that were later mixed with populations from Europe and the Middle East. This would explain the complex genetic patterns they were discovering. The lack of typical Asian genetic markers in Cherokee DNA was particularly puzzling. If all Native Americans descended from Asian populations, why would Cherokee people show such different genetic patterns from other Native American groups? These findings sparked debates about the diversity of Native American origins. Maybe different Native American groups had completely different ancestral histories, rather than all sharing the same Bering Strait origins. The Cherokee DNA research suggested that American prehistory was far more complex than the simple Bering Strait migration model indicated. Multiple migration routes, multiple time periods, and multiple ancestral populations might all have contributed to the genetic diversity of Native American groups. This complexity challenged not just scientific theories, but also cultural and political assumptions about Native American identity and history. If Cherokee origins were more complex than previously thought, what did this mean for understanding Native American heritage overall? The controversy and scientific debate. The Cherokee DNA findings sparked intense debate within the scientific community, with some researchers embracing the discoveries while others questioned the methodology and interpretations of the genetic evidence. Critics argued that the unusual genetic patterns in Cherokee DNA could be explained by more recent admixture, intermarriage with European and Middle Eastern populations after European colonization began. They suggested that what researchers were seeing wasn't ancient ancestry, but relatively recent genetic mixing. However, supporters of the research pointed out that the genetic patterns showed characteristics of much older ancestry. Several of the Middle Eastern DNA test markers were traced back to pre-Roman period female ancestors, suggesting these connections were far more ancient than colonial era intermarriage could explain. The controversy intensified when researchers began publishing books and papers about their findings. Donald Yates traces the origins of the Cherokee to an era when their ancestry was formed from Jewish and Eastern Mediterranean roots, representing some of the more provocative interpretations of the DNA evidence. Professional archaeologists and historians raised concerns about these interpretations, arguing that they lacked sufficient supporting evidence from non-genetic sources. They pointed out that extraordinary claims about prehistoric contact between continents required extraordinary evidence, but the genetic evidence kept accumulating. The majority of subjects revealed anomalous haplotypes not previously classified as American Indian, making it increasingly difficult to dismiss these findings as statistical anomalies or methodological errors. The debate revealed deeper tensions within academia about how to interpret genetic evidence and what kinds of conclusions could be drawn from DNA studies. Some researchers felt that genetic evidence alone wasn't sufficient to rewrite American prehistory. Others argued that the Cherokee DNA findings were part of a larger pattern of discoveries that were challenging traditional models of human migration and settlement. Similar unexpected genetic patterns were being discovered in other populations around the world. The controversy also highlighted the complex relationship between genetic ancestry and cultural identity. Just because Cherokee people might have diverse genetic origins didn't diminish their Native American cultural identity and historical experiences. Some Cherokee people themselves had mixed reactions to these discoveries. While some found the genetic diversity interesting, others worried that it might be used to challenge Cherokee tribal sovereignty or cultural authenticity. The scientific debate continues today, with researchers still working to understand the full implications of Cherokee DNA patterns and what they reveal about American prehistory. What this means for American history. The Cherokee DNA discoveries have profound implications that extend far beyond genetics, potentially reshaping our understanding of American history, prehistoric migrations, and the complexity of human settlement patterns. If Cherokee people truly have significant European and Middle Eastern ancestry that predates Columbus, it suggests that contact between the Old World and the Americas might have been occurring for thousands of years before documented European exploration. This possibility challenges the narrative of Columbus discovering America.
When Columbus first sighted the land of the New World, America,
And suggests instead that there may have been ongoing contact and migration between continents throughout prehistory. Such contact could explain not just genetic patterns, but also cultural and technological similarities that researchers have noted between Old World and New World civilizations. The implications extend to our understanding of ancient maritime capabilities. If people were crossing the Atlantic thousands of years ago, it suggests that ancient civilizations possessed seafaring technologies and navigational skills that historians have underestimated. These discoveries also raise questions about other Native American groups. If Cherokee people have such complex ancestral origins, what might DNA studies reveal about other tribes? Are there similar patterns of diverse ancestry that haven't been discovered yet? The Cherokee DNA findings contribute to a growing body of evidence that human prehistory was far more complex and interconnected than previously thought. Similar discoveries around the world are revealing ancient population movements and connections that challenge simple models of human migration. For Cherokee people themselves, these discoveries add another layer to their rich cultural heritage. Rather than diminishing their Native American identity, the genetic diversity might reflect a long history of cultural exchange and adaptation that strengthened Cherokee communities. The findings also have implications for how we think about genetic testing and ancestry. While a DNA test may provide evidence of indigenous American ethnicity, connect you with relatives, and encourage further research, it does not establish a connection to a specific tribe. This reminds us that cultural identity and genetic ancestry are related but distinct concepts. Cherokee identity is based on cultural traditions, historical experiences, and community connections, not just genetic markers. The DNA discoveries highlight the importance of continued research into American prehistory. There's clearly much more to learn about how different populations settled in the Americas and how they interacted over thousands of years. These findings encourage us to think more broadly about American history and to remain open to discoveries that might challenge our assumptions about the past. The ongoing research and future discoveries. Cherokee DNA research continues to evolve, with new studies and larger sample sizes providing increasingly detailed pictures of Cherokee genetic heritage and its implications for understanding American prehistory. Recent research phases have expanded beyond initial discoveries to include more comprehensive population studies. Your personal DNA profile is compared with our data for more than 90 American Indian populations from numerous sources, allowing for more detailed comparisons and analysis. The addition of new reference populations, including U.S. Cherokee enrolled, N equals to 33, in July 2018. Most recently, in 2024, we added Texas Cherokee, N equals to 54, which has provided researchers with better baseline data for understanding Cherokee genetic patterns. Ongoing studies are investigating whether the unusual genetic patterns found in Cherokee DNA appear in other southeastern Native American groups. This research could reveal whether Cherokee people are unique or whether similar ancestral complexity exists throughout the region. Advanced DNA sequencing technologies are providing increasingly detailed information about Cherokee genetic heritage. These newer techniques can identify more ancient genetic markers and provide better resolution for understanding when different ancestral populations mixed. International collaboration is expanding Cherokee DNA research to include comparisons with ancient DNA samples from Europe, the Middle East, and other regions. These comparisons might help identify specific historical periods when genetic mixing occurred. Researchers are also investigating the cultural implications of Cherokee genetic diversity. Are there linguistic, religious, or cultural traditions among Cherokee people that might reflect their diverse ancestral origins? Archaeological research is being conducted to look for material evidence that might support the genetic findings. If Cherokee people had ancient connections to Old World populations, there might be archaeological evidence of early contact or migration. The research is also expanding to include environmental DNA and other cutting-edge techniques that might provide additional insights into Cherokee origins and prehistory. Future studies are planned to investigate specific genetic markers that appear to connect Cherokee people with particular Old World populations. These more focused studies might help identify specific historical events or long-term migration patterns that shaped their ancestry. The ongoing research continues to generate new questions and hypotheses about American prehistory, ensuring that Cherokee DNA studies will remain an active and evolving area of scientific investigation for many years to come. As sample sizes increase and analytical techniques steadily improve, researchers expect to develop an even more detailed and comprehensive understanding of Cherokee genetic heritage and its broader implications for American history. The mystery of Cherokee DNA has uncovered groundbreaking evidence that challenges long-held beliefs about Native American origins and America's prehistory. With unexpected links to the Middle East, traces of European ancestry, and patterns that defy traditional migration theories, this genetic puzzle suggests a far more complex and interconnected past than historians once imagined. Whether the result of ancient transoceanic contact or multiple migration routes, these findings are pushing researchers to rethink human prehistory, proving once again that modern science has the power to rewrite history in ways we never expected. What do you think about these surprising genetic discoveries? Do they suggest ancient contact between continents, or is there another explanation for Cherokee people's diverse ancestral heritage?